All right, so it's been 10 months or 11 months or 2 years or 3 years since the last podcast.
Yeah.
And the ASMR mechanical keyboards is Amir working behind us. So we decided to let him work. You're going to have to sit closer to me, sweetheart.
Oh.
Closer.
How's that?
Perfect. So yeah, I recently got a DM on Discord of people just asking me, some of our grunts and people from outside the server asking just how the game is going, and particularly if we played the Jagex version of Ace of Spades. There should be now like a crickets sound effect. What can I add here, Grandy?
We did.
I know, Grandy's a professional. He has notes because he also had at least 40 hours from what he told me that he actually played the game, and I think from what I remember on my Steam profile, I think I have like 12, maybe 10 hours in total. So yeah, I thought we'll just share our perspectives on it, and let's start with you, man. What do you think, Grandy? What's your first memory? Every opinion.
First memory is pain.
Yeah, I mean, going back, it's what? It was 2012, end of 2012, that it was released. But like the journey to it, I mean, I have a different perspective on it from a lot of people, just because I was in the staff for the beta side of things, so I got to hear a lot of what was happening in the background, and had to keep certain things that weren't publicly available, and so I heard a lot about some of the rubbish stuff that was happening behind the scenes. Because of course Ben, who made the beta, left a good 2 months or so before the Jagex version got released on Steam at the end of December. Finding out about that and then hearing how he got treated and all that, it was a very sour taste going into it. But it's interesting how it turned out, I think, in the end. And I imagine we'll have a lot of different opinions on various bits of it. So the Jagex version, I don't think I ever played any pre-release or anything like that. I got access to it at the exact same time as everyone else. But the behind the scenes, what was going in the community side of things, with Sally and Sniped coming in, and the release plan they had, which ended up being just outsourcing the prototype that Ben, Exoy and Matt had been working on, and just throwing it at a games company to say, hey, go and make this for Christmas or before Christmas. And so they turned it around in sort of 8 weeks from the prototype into what was released on Steam.
Well, I will at least give them some credit for delivering something in 8 months, I suppose. I mean, if I remember, do you remember
8 weeks?
I don't. 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Even crazier, yeah.
That's nuts.
They took Ace of Spades and spent 8 weeks, 2 months, and made the Jagex Ace of Spades.
Yeah.
That's pretty nuts.
The OpenGL tests that Matt was doing, he's still got them up on his YouTube channel. And you can see he sort of got up to the point of connecting to the beta servers to 0.75, and he started messing about with spawning helicopters in and MGs and a rocket launcher of sorts, which of course did end up making it into the final game. But yeah, they took that and a version of the open source server software that was made at the time. They made a fork of that, paid off the guys who had inputted into it, and 8 weeks, crazy.
So yeah, at least on that front, they do deserve, accolades for at least doing that. That's pretty nuts. But I think that what I'd like to at least focus on, because it's what I remember the most. I wasn't really aware of what was happening behind the scenes, as much as you were. I just remember sending you the trailer, and being I have a very, very bad feeling about this, and I'm gonna show what I can from the trailer.
I remember only the jetpack, right?
Yeah.
Jetpack soldier.
The first time,
I saw the jetpack and said, nope.
Exactly, and it was that quick. So I think I was already down on the game just from the initial trailer, and I did wanted to give it a chance. Of course, I pre-purchased it. I wanted to give it a shot. I was like, all right, even just from a game design experience, or it's rare to see something like that when you get a kind of project you're familiar with in its very early stages, then it gets handed out to a publisher, and you get so quickly something that's completely different. It's a kind of a unique, I'd say, set of circumstances, particularly for Ace of Spades. So I think for me to just immediately go in, play a few rounds. I think it was the London map. I remember a map in
Oh yeah,
London,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
I played mostly on. I think I enjoyed that map, to be honest. I remember from what I can remember. I remember they're having like in Worms, like they had tombstones appear every time they died.
Which then exploded. Yeah.
Yeah, which then exploded. It's like it's coming back to me like a Vietnam, flashback. It's kind of like I'm starting to remember it slowly.
There were tombstones. I don't.
Yeah. The second they died, there were
didn't even
tombstones that
remember that.
explode exactly like in Worms.
Yeah. In the Rocketeer, if you destroyed the guy with the jetpack, he would sort of fly up into the air and then explode and drop down.
It's a cute idea, but I think
It
for
is.
me,
It's a cute game. It's just not the Ace of Spades
Yeah.
that I think people had in mind, which is an interesting thing because games nowadays, more than ever, can be in years for early access, even when there's gameplay and it's polished and things
Yeah.
can change drastically. We were working on other game projects at the time, and we just played around a few servers and a few levels. And I remember just dropping it. And granted, you probably have the timeline down to a T, but do you remember how long it took for the, let's call it, Too Little Too Late trailer, where it's like, no, wait, guys, this is Ace of Spades. Here's the classic mode that we're adding.
Yeah.
Do you remember how long that took?
my bet is 2 months.
It was less than that. It was in January. So December 12th, 2012 is when the game released. And even like 2 weeks after that, they released some Christmassy stuff. And then the community side of things was already heating up and there was a lot of throwback in various areas. But a lot of people did enjoy the game. People who hadn't played the original and just liked it for its more arcadey feel. But yeah, there was certainly a voice going on that the beta community has just been left out to dry, not least because, the community side of it has just been nuked by that point. They had already wiped the old servers, the forums, I would say, and servers.
I wonder if the original Ace of Spades wouldn't. If the Ace of Spades would just directly or from the start have been Jagex Ace of Spades, would it fail like that or succeed?
You mean if that was the first
Yeah, if
experience
that was
we all
the
had?
initial, there was no legacy Ace of Spades.
What do you think, Randy?
That's an interesting one I hadn't thought of. My opinion of the game is one that classic mode that came in from the beta experience was actually not too bad. And I think that if I'd come straight in to the main game, I probably would have seen it as a bit of a quirky voxel game. I'm not sure I would have really given it more than a couple of moments notice. But it certainly appealed to a wider audience for sure, and you have to give them props for that, even if it wasn't the game that we wanted.
You think it wouldn't stick with like the amount of people that came to the original, because the original one was much more like open worldy in a way. You could do anything you want practically. With simple tools.
You mean it was less structured as a more cohesive experience?
You
It was
just
more
have
maps and
you just have the mechanic
Streamlined.
and like the behavior that arose from it, instead of carefully planned or not carefully planned
carefully copied, I'd say,
carefully,
from other games.
not carefully copied mechanics by the Jagex version. One of the things I didn't like is the engineer could like destroy like a larger amount of cubes, right? Something like that.
The miner, yeah.
Yeah, and I just didn't like the idea that he could he had like a model of cubes he can destroy or something like that. I don't remember what else, but I just didn't like the idea of changing it from the simple one cube to destroy and to like have him like, I remember he was OP or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
The way, to go back to your question of if it would have been received the same way, I think that, speaking for myself, the reason we loved him, like I mentioned, like my friend Dennis who introduced me to the game, the reason he introduced it to me is because he knew how much I appreciate the less is more type of
Yeah, exactly.
game loops and mechanics. And I think that, certainly from the older versions that we got to play only since we met Grandy, and to see even an earlier piece and see that, Ben really did a lot to try and address, I think most of our complaints would have been fine. I remember playing a lot, the proper Ace of Spades version. I was attracted to simplicity. So the second you introduce, and it's not about just the fact that they introduced classes in the Jagex version. I don't have a particular problem with the concept of classes, but the way they handled their kit, like you say, from the miner, the way you could dig so quickly, and just the jetpack and the whole fantasy, I'd just say, the package became less military-like, and it became just more arcadic. That's the way.
It was
That's
more like toys.
arcade.
I think the
yeah.
main thing is they wanted to make the matches much faster and make the pace of the game
Yeah.
much faster. So it felt like a AAA match, like Overwatch or something like that. So you select your class and it fits. There's the advantages, the disadvantages against whatever, and it's a pretty quick game. I think 30 minutes, something like that. And the original Ace of Spades, a server could last for weeks. But a match, like if you would start a proper match, that would take hours to finish if everyone stays and no one leaves mid game.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand where they're coming from. I mean, there was a decision, there was a conscious decision to make these changes, and I think in their eyes, they just saw it as the logical step forward to make it, a product that's much more.
I think there's a sweet spot between 20 minutes match and 2-hour match to fit to the game style that Ace of Spades was for us.
Well, I think, but again, match length is not necessarily
the pace.
Yeah, just the gameplay pace, movement, the way, just like I said before, it just became less tactical for me.
It was a style change, completely a style change, and you can see the timeline of it being when Ben left. Basically, everything that was planned, the roadmaps they had, were all thrown out the window. The producer that replaced him just went, okay, well, he's not here anymore. We don't need to hold his vision of the game up anymore, and so we're going to do this. We're going to outsource it, and we're just going to tell those guys to streamline it and make it fun. As far as I know, that was basically all they were given.
If Jagex Ace of Spades would never happen and Ace of Spades would have continued to the vision you said Ben, what do you think that vision would look like?
Well, I happen to know the stuff that was being talked about at the time, so I don't think any of it would particularly be surprising, and it's stuff that we've talked about a bit on and off for Born to Build as well. Things like either squad systems or sort of map markers, any sort of healing revival, voice chat potentially. He wanted to make variants on classic gen, sort of more types of terrain, different types of generators, and then obviously we started seeing some of the weapons that he was looking into, the rocket launcher, MG, satchels, landmines, and making I don't know whether you're too familiar, but there was an airstrike script in the beta version which was made by the community as part of a server mod, which basically just made grenades fall from the sky in like a carpet bombing fashion. But he wanted to make that official in something that actually looked reasonable, probably with like a plane going
so
ahead
it's
or whatever.
settled. We do have to add napalm eventually, in one way or another.
Bombardment.
Yeah.
But it's basically just taking what was there, adding some new bits to it, polishing up a lot of it. It makes sense in many senses because it's taking what was the beta, but sort of remaking it from scratch in a way that is more presentable.
Was there let's call it a thematic package to it? Was it supposed to be set in like a time period or a certain kind of conflict, or was it just gonna stay this purgatory of the voxelized the soldiers fighting each other?
Purgatory voxelized world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think originally it was meant to be Vietnam. I think that was meant to be the well, at least that's what he matched it to, I would say. I'm not sure it was particularly all that planned out. He wasn't the most experienced developer out there, so I think he just kind of took this engine from Ken Silverman, Voxlab, and just started playing around with it. Realized he can make some very simple models from it, and then went with it. So I'm not sure how much of that was completely planned or just, hey, you can dig around the terrain, make tons of tunnels and things like that, so why not just say it's based in Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, that was my initial, for me, it made the most sense. I mean, when we talked about why you said it in Vietnam, you have to deal with the foliage and trees and all that, all the things that you have to deal with, because digging and combat warfare is always Vietnam in my head. So it just made sense, I suppose. And so to take it back to the Jagex version, so you're saying after a few weeks they released, what was it called? Just the classic, if I remember correctly?
Yeah.
Yes, that was January the following year. I'd been trying to mediate somewhat between the old community and the new one, and obviously they got a huge kickback from the old community for a ton of very good reasons. But at a certain point, I think they felt that they wanted to try and appease that community in some way. By this point, build and shoot was already a thing. In fact, it was a thing like 2 months before the Jagex version even released. Like as soon as it was clear that they were properly taking over the community side of it and wiping stuff, a few of the staff came together to build that. But when it came to classic mode, they wanted to get some feedback on it, and so myself and a bunch of the players that were still around that played some of the original versions were sort of brought together in a forum on their site and became what was called, I think, the classic mode development advisors. And I seem to remember we gave a bunch of feedback, they barely listened to it, and that was about it. So like one round of feedback, nothing was done, and that was about it. Or maybe they released a gen map, a very badly done gen map in response to our feedback. Yeah, it was just Perlin Noise, Green Hills, and that was it. Like it was a very badly done gen map. But I'm not sure whether that came afterwards or not. But yeah, classic mode was definitely an attempt at appeasement, which actually, in terms of how it played, I think that's where the 44 hours comes from. My initial time spent in the main game, not that long, but classic mode was okay. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, it was the same for me. I don't think I played more than a few rounds with the classes, and I remember telling you, like, all right, let's just wait. They'll release, hopefully, some kind of other classic version, which they eventually did.
Yeah.
So definitely the majority of my playtime with the Jagex version is the classic version. And the thing is, why do you think that wasn't enough? I mean, I know that there was a more controversy about the fact that it was even it wasn't free. Secondly, they released the Valentine's Day Massacre DLC, I think.
That was right after it, yeah.
Yeah, which didn't sit right with people. So the question is, if it did release and they did have the classic version, and I know that they did have a map editor, why do you think it just wasn't enough and they eventually just, pulled the plug on the whole thing?
Well, aside sort of flipping it a little bit, if classic mode would have been the thing that had been released initially and then the classes came later, I reckon it possibly still would have been alive today in some senses. In other senses, in terms of practicalities, obviously they outsourced this 8-week development cycle to Blitz Games. Anytime they wanted an update to the game, they had to pay an external company to do these things. They didn't have internal resources for a very long time. I went to visit around the time of the Valentine's Day Massacre at their HQ, and I think it was just Jamie, their graphics guy, was there. Pretty much everything else was still external, or they were trying to move internal, I can't remember. But September of that year, 2013, Blitz Games went bust. So right before the map editor came out, like the full map editor came out, Blitz Games wasn't around. So at that point they're hiring internally and they've got salaries to pay, and I suppose at some point the hype from the initial release was kind of lost. Like the classes was fun for a couple of matches, but people didn't want to stay. And then 2 months later, classic mode appeased the old community, but obviously we still had the old game to play and kind of just stayed there. And so yeah, with nothing really being done to classic mode, the old people didn't come across, and I suppose eventually at some point they just didn't, they must have removed their internal staff and then didn't have the stuff around with knowledge of the code base to fix stuff that came up, and so just operating system based problems and other bugs basically broke it or broke most of it. I guess they just didn't want to pay to fix it.
Yeah, sounds like they got the AAA treatment. The AAA freelancing studio treatment that's just costs more money in the long term.
The detail that actually I didn't know was that Jagex externalized the project to another company, right?
Yeah.
For someone who works in a studio, working, like, giving your project to like some studio to do it for you is always a horrible idea.
I mean, we've seen it recently with Warcraft 3 and Reforged. They just gave it to an external studio, I think, that does mobile games, and the
If you're-
performance showed it, and it's a freaking Blizzard title.
When you're doing a game, which is something that I describe as a passion product, even if it's a AAA, someone have passion for it. It's a form of art or something.
Yeah, but all right, you're separating the indies from the business. There's nothing you can do about it. And the indies sit somewhere in the middle. It's still a business in the end of the day. You can't keep operating at a loss for a game that, if somebody higher up the food chain says, listen, we either continue this and salvage the mistake, or we just cut our losses now and try something else later. And if I remember correctly, they did release something else.
Yeah, so end of 2014 they released Block and Load, which in some senses I felt was kind of what they wanted to build with Ace of Spades, but actually put a separate team together and sort of relaunch from scratch. So that was November 2014. By that point they weren't really working on Ace of Spades at all. And as I said, I think they've just moved the people across that wanted to move across and had more time to think about how they wanted to design things. And I think that was much better received, Block and Load. It was kind of a fresh slate for them. But what they did to Ace of Spades was more on the lines of milking a cash cow whilst they could, whilst not really knowing what they're doing, which is a shame. It's just a massive shame at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's mishandling of just the potential of the property, I suppose. I'm looking at it now. I didn't even remember that they had these character designs that are...
That's so weird.
Yeah, very odd.
Not Ace of Spades at all.
It's a good name, though. I'll give him that. It's an excellent name.
Yeah, and it's...
Block and Load,
look at the
good.
colors.
It's good. Catchy. Yeah. And they're bringing out Block and Load 2 soon, I think.
Yeah? Oh my god.
Yeah, I've tried the beta and wasn't particularly impressed. I think I'm not sure it's Jagex anymore, but yeah, they're bringing out a sequel to it soon. Only like 9 years later.
Block and Load 2. It's a free game.
It's such a small thinking. Like
It looks like what was that guy?
Look, he's got a shovel.
Reminds me of another game, the Rambo guy.
So it's a shooter, but
So it's a game, yeah. It's a
It's
game.
again just a very class-based. At least in the beta, it was very like deployable based. Lots and lots of deployables out there.
and again, it looks very fast paced.
Yeah.
Well, that's the trend now. I mean, most game companies, I think our age group is considered already half foot in the grave. So they're like, even though we have the potential, they much prefer to target like, wait a minute, Fortnite has the building, we have the building. How about we combine the buildings into a new game and whatever. It's just designed by either committee or doing what they think will work. I mean, I get where they're coming from.
The pace of the game determines the style of the game. For a slower pace shooter, it's not just like an arena shooter. It's battlefield shooter. You have a much longer game. You can enter much more into tactics or strategies on how to defeat the enemy team if you have more than just run and shoot,
Yeah.
or even build like small
And
structures.
this is coming from you, who's a very avid Unreal tournament player, which means that you know how to. It's not that you see.
It's basics. It's run, shoot, but it's easy and it's not complicated, and I really like it. Again, what you said
It's
before.
not class based at all.
It's on class, but it's simpler.
Yeah, which is I think the core of the issue here. It always feels like, and before we even started,
It's not like I'm not enjoying a shooter game
or a fast one.
or first one. Yeah, it's
It's just not what you wanted of this particular experience, because I think I'm always bringing it back to the slower pace. So, for example, Grandy, you and I played several good hours of Hell Let Loose, which I would say is a slower paced game.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for me that I really enjoyed it, but again, there's something, maybe because of the grand scale of the matches itself. The experience that we're going for is totally there. I'm just saying that for me, while I did enjoy the slower pace, having the 30-second like wait time between every respawn and watching that you died screen like it's Dark Souls, only longer.
Yeah.
There's something that's really building up the like frustration for me, and while I don't mind certain counters for like respawns and things like that, staying out of the battlefield and staying out of the game so much, it's one of the particular reasons why I don't like the battle royale genres in general. It's just the long way, even if there are revives and things like that, it's just something that I enjoy less, and I think I get it now more, the more that I see current multiplayer games, how deathmatch kind of went away, I'd say, because battle royale is basically deathmatch just rearranged with some of the rules rearranged. It's still
Yeah.
like kind
It's
of a
deathmatch, but bigger.
yeah, and it works for you. And I think we also discussed among ourselves like what would be our take like on a battle royale format if we had to do, gun pointed at our heads, you have to make a battle royale game as a studio. Like, well, how would we approach it just to make us enjoy the experience? And I think that taking that back into, I think battle royales weren't yet a thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Randy. When Lock and Load and Jagex Ace of Spades released, were there any prominent battle royales yet? Did it catch on already?
No, I don't think so by that point, really. I mean, Fortnite did come out a long time ago, but
It wasn't yet the battle royale game. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I can't remember much in the way of battle royales before then.
So I think it would make sense that if this entire story would have happened like 5 years ago, you would see them releasing just an Ace of Spades battle royale and saying like what happens, because it's just they were just chasing what was working at the time. That's just that's the perception I got from the Jagex version. It's like it's something wearing the skin of another game, but the core is just completely different and unique experience from a design perspective. Like I said earlier, that's why it was sad to see it happening and seeing it mishandled. I'd say it was a bummer. It's like seeing something it's like I already played this game. Like, what are you doing? I already played this game and it's good. What is all this tassels and bullshit and fireworks you connected to it from all different directions, from all different types of things to just create a completely fundamental different experience.
Exactly, that's exactly what I want to say. It just created a different experience, and an experience I didn't look for in Ace of Spades.
You think we can find redeeming qualities? Because I think you said, and I noticed as well, that people usually comment, especially I think on the first video where I kind of like mentioned it, that I know that people enjoyed the Jagex version of Ace of Spades when they didn't play the original. So what do you think are the redeeming qualities, if you had to say? Because we do have to say like something about it aside from
Cubes.
Aside from like the development speed, I suppose.
Oops. Yeah, and it's something that even Matt, who was the one who started on the OpenGL client, has said of the Jagex version, in that he was quite actually in many ways impressed by what was created at the end of the day, in terms of how you take a voxel shooter as just a general concept, and a voxel shooter that has been, I would say, wrongly compared to TF2, but the way they ran with that sort of prompt streamlined some of the gameplay, as we've already mentioned, like the game times, how long each game lasts, and that kind of thing, adding in the prefabs to make it a bit quicker and changing the pace a little bit. Like some of the ways they streamlined it, and just some of the interactions in the game itself are actually pretty fun. I think the zombies mode in it was really quite popular, and it was something that they can market very easily. I looked through a bunch of videos, and like I would say half of the big Minecraft YouTubers at some point in time made a video, probably in zombie mode. So there's definitely redeeming qualities to the game, and they certainly try to hit as many of those types of experiences as possible with the amount of game modes they had and the design of the classes that they had. And yeah, if it was just a standalone game being released, I'd probably have a much better view on it than the history that the IP came with. As if they completely screwed over the IP in every single possible way. The actual result in terms of the gameplay wasn't terrible in some senses, and it certainly appealed to a wider audience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember the zombie mode being really like if I would ever come across a video of the Jagex version of Ace of Spades on YouTube by chance, it would have been the zombie, like a zombie mode. And I think for me, I'm looking now just at screenshots here, and I didn't remember that I like the general UI design, the direction, like the menu, the score screen and everything. I just like the way that they, I guess, interpreted. I think it was very cohesive and nice, and I think it was a nice package. I remember they also had this kind of like funky main menu theme. I remember it was a bit funny, and I liked it. Yeah.
It was good. It was a good theme. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think some of the packaging, some of the stuff was nice, and I think for you, was there anything positive for you in the Jagex version? If you had to think of something. I liked when it was over.
No, to be honest, I'm something I did like.
Yeah, there has to be something. That you
I mean, I
enjoyed.
did like that the graphics were better because Ace of Spades were
It
very.
looked better than the OpenGL version.
Yeah,
it felt a bit better.
It looked
Yes,
better, but
no.
it didn't look like what I wanted it to look. I mean, at least not the characters. I mean, the world was okay.
I did like the classic version of the deuces, the soldiers. I did like the classic take because I remembered when we saw the launch trailer, and we didn't really connect with the voxelized look that they gave. They completely committed to the voxel aesthetic, and I think only the sniper is the one I liked. He has the face hidden and like a ski
Very.
mask. You remember?
Yeah.
I think this guy. I remember that I did enjoy like his visuals and all that, but one of the I remember when
Don't
we
like
opened.
the texture on him.
I know, but when we opened, like we mentioned before, when we started Born to Build, we started with the grunt, and I remember we immediately pulled up images from the Jagex version saying like we don't want a nose, we don't want the double chins, we don't want
The Babel effect, like the voxel Babel.
yeah, a bit like I don't know. We just went over like it gave us a lot of direction of like what do we want to avoid? Yeah,
We
because-
didn't want the Minecraft pen as a blank.
Yeah, that was for me to do the reloads because I wanted to do some proper reload animations, and I did see that people say like, yeah, well, it's part of the charm. I mean, I get it, but we wanted to find a middle ground. So I think if you look at this style and you look at the original Ace of Spades, I think we aimed for the middle. I'd say,
Yeah.
at least that was from our perspective. Because if you can look at the soldier, there's like this shot of him when he's like front facing the camera with a bazooka. So you can see similarities with the gear and the way the knees and things behave. But the face, if you lose the nose and the cigar mouth and you add just the beard and remove the extra like beveled.
Oh, if you change the character, yeah.
Yeah, if you change the character completely, but you get something. All I'm saying
Yeah,
is,
you change the colors, then you
What
change
was-
the weapon.
what I was trying to say is that it did help us. It's like we looked at it and it gave us a good direction to understand. Like, yeah, we also want to evolve the style in a way, just not that far, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and like in some ways, you've got the original character model in the beta, and then you've got the Juice model of Jagex's version, and then the Grunt is sort of the next evolution of that almost.
Yeah, because I did like it. I did like the way they interpreted the original. I think Deuces. I think they did a great job at that. I mean, the models were really like, yeah, this is what I imagined them which they should have looked like at the beginning.
There's only one thing when you're designing a voxel model. The head is a cube.
Yeah.
The head should be a cube.
What you're saying about the sniper that he has? Like,
Yes.
the chin?
I don't like the beard.
It's not a bit. Oh, you mean the
It's
miner?
like a mask. I don't like it. I don't like that his head is like round suddenly.
I see what you mean.
And I do agree in general in terms of like, the UI looked good. I liked the subtle, like the subtle texture on the blocks. I think did quite well, and the obscuring, like the shadowing in the blocks was all very nice on the game. I will just remind you what the pistol looked like when you were aiming the pistol.
Oh,
It would definitely
That's a pistol.
that's a pistol. There was definitely
Not something
rough,
else.
rough bits.
yeah.
And when you were aiming a rocket launcher, it was as if you were actually in the barrel of
in
the
the
rocket
barrel of the
launcher.
rocket, I remember that.
Like,
I remember
There was
that.
some very, very rough edges, which must have been just, we're going to throw these weapons into the game. You've got like half a week to do it, go. And they just had to do it. Which is exactly what would happened. But, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Well, that's like an old version, what you just Bandicam watermark classics.
Oh, yeah. That was from an old video of mine. I did 2 videos on Jagex. One of them was when the game was first released and I was on a laptop in my student dorm in university, and somebody else gifted me the game, I think because they couldn't play it, or I played on their account, can't remember. And then the second time was when Classic Mode was released, and I was like, yeah, this seems to be alright, on the right lines. Hope they do something with it. And then nothing happened. So.
I do like the I've even seen the image, the soft shadows under the tree.
What is it? Is that the Sky Dome?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very pixelated sky. Yeah.
I like that you're slowly getting angrier the more images I show you of the game.
It's like you remind me why I'm not playing
Is
it
that
anymore.
the fucking sky?
I think from what I remember is when we got the game, we played it for like 2 weeks and then we never looked back.
Yeah, yeah. It was also big, performance issues early on too. Like I couldn't run it at more than like 10, 15 frames at the start. Yeah, my video very much shows that. It was awful experience.
Yeah, I think it was a rough experience. I remember like having people with performance issues. I had connectivity issues as well. But yeah, I mean it's I can't criticize the the devs and the deadline that they got. I can only criticize the people who are. I can only criticize the people who made the decision makers about the entire way they approached the IP and how little they actually looked at what the game was. They just they just looked at like it was Play-Doh. Like, oh, all right, we're gonna improve Play-Doh by adding more stuff to it, and it's just like
adding guns.
Yeah, and adding like more ridiculous stuff to make it less like what it's supposed to be and more like what they think it should be, because that's what's popular now.
What they think will sell. Yeah, exactly.
And I think it has kind of a unique place in. I mean, I know it's pretty obscure now. I mean, it did get a short revival, not the Jagex version, but I know, like, Roblox scares me. Like, yeah, the platform itself, everything I hear about this, I'm starting to feel like an old man. I'm like, those youngsters on their Robloxes making kind of money and doing...
I thought you're gonna say that I used to be with it, and then they changed what it was.
Yeah.
What happened to you?
It just happened to me, so... Maybe you know about this a bit more, Grandy. Like, is there I know that if you look now for like Ace of Spades game footage, most likely you'll find from the Roblox version of it, right?
Yeah, so there's an Ace of Spades with a Z Roblox port of sorts, which I've heard is not terrible, but it's probably got a bit more of sort of the classic mode kind of feel to it. Like I think it's meant to be more towards the beta, but it feels more like classic mode, from what I understand. I've not actually played it myself. I'll have to admit to that. I'm just trying to find out if there's any information on how many people actually play it. But people are making crazy stuff in Roblox, man. It's
I know,
wild.
that's why it scares me. It's like this alternate universe where weird like, games and mods are being made, and it's like every time I see something from that, it's either looks like blocks and voxels or it looks like Unreal. And I'm like, this was made in Roblox, and I'm like, I don't even want to know what is happening over there, but I'll have to.
It looks like an alternate universe.
I was happy to see that it happened, because Roblox is a good place to have like a younger generation of gamers be exposed to new different ideas. So to see that succeeding over there, for me, if we're looking at our studio and the game, it's like, yeah, look, this game keeps popping up here and there. And people are still attracted to the formula, I'd say, to the core game concept. There's obviously, I'd say, unrealized potential. And I think that what we all came together in agreement is like, how can we recreate this the most straightforward and simplified way with as much control as we can give to the community and ourselves as developers. Most of the delays that we had this year is to just make sure that our engine just can support any previous efforts made by the community. Amir's behind us typing away. He's finally reached the
map format.
He's basically working on that like for the last 2 days, just to get the colors right. So Grandy can work on the map format, and just so we know, even just for internal testing, that we can build on what's came before. I'd say give more respect to the original core concept of what we thought the game should be.
Yeah.
It's an interesting case study. I mean, it did help us. I think if it didn't exist at all, like if Jagex hadn't bought it and they wouldn't have released it, and for some other reason, Ben had stopped like developing it and would just stayed like in its current version. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we might have been more tempted to take. I mean, not personally myself, I'm speaking maybe for you guys, but we might have been thinking, oh yeah, let's take this and, make it something very different from it, approached it more haphazardly, if you know what I mean. If we didn't have the Jagex example to like say, all right, we know where the line has crossed, because somebody else crossed it, and we can now look, from our experience and perspective, look at the distance and say, all right, we know where we want to fit, if that makes sense.
So what you're saying is basically the best thing Jagex gave the world is themselves as a bad example.
I think so. At least in this particular case, yeah. I mean, they have RuneScape, they have other successful titles that they're working on. It's just in this particular case, it did help us as a studio say, let's focus on the tech more. Because we know that simple game loop and what needs to work is already proving itself over and over again. And I don't know.
There's a big difference between them and us. We're not like taking the original IP and changing it. We're creating an original IP ourselves. So we're not like saying like it's this game that you know, and we're gonna make something else out of it. We're making another game.
Yeah, I think, Grandy, you'd agree that our endpoint is to find that undiscovered territory where we all, I think, imagined as players that the game should eventually end up.
There's a niche. There's a niche of games that we're looking for.
What do you think?
Yeah, just the fact that the game has changed a lot, even in its history since 0.75 released, and way before that even. There's been multiple versions of the game. The original one that was so viral, sort of, you could see glimpses of it in later versions, but it definitely lost some of its original charm. And then, of course, you've got the new clients that have been made through the community, but no one really daring to launch or relaunch the game on their own platform and trying to build their own community for it. So something new needs to come along at some point, and it might as well be Born to Build.
Yeah, hopefully so. Thank you for joining us on this long delay podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to release some a bit more frequently because a couple of soldiers asked to hear your nice bassy voice.
Ooh.
Yeah, to hear it more often. So we'll oblige. So thanks for tuning in, and catch you next time.
Yeah.